Jason Simons, thank you so much for joining me today. We are about to get really nerdy into the idea of what is involved in a cyber insurance policy. And thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into this, I just want you to give the viewers here a quick overview of yourself at the moment.
Sure. I lead the cyber risk and insurance practice at Mills Oakley. It's a law firm, Australian law firm, has offices all around the country. I've got an insurance background, hence why we're nerding out on insurance today, but I specialize in cyber risk.
Yep, fantastic. And you're exactly the right person to talk to, because one of the main questions I get a lot from people when we're talking about cyber, with regards to, when the topic of do you insure or don't you insure comes up, is a real confusion amongst professionals that understand how to read insurance policies generally. A real confusion, just what's covered, what is covered. Let's start there. It's covered in a cyber insurance policy.
Absolutely. I'll admit straight away, I am very biased. You need to be buying cyber insurance. So I'll put that on the table, take that with a pinch of salt, glass of salt, whatever you need to take it with. So I would strongly recommend you get it, because what you get, I believe, is worth the price of admission, because you get both what's called first party cover. So this is the thing that'll help you out when you have an incident right at the time of the crisis itself. It'll pick up the cost of lawyers, IT forensics, PR experts, data review experts. It'll also cover things like if you've suffered a business interruption, financial loss. It might help you out with data recovery, hardware damage, all sorts of wonderful coverage that helps you with an incident itself. Then, just in case that wasn't enough, you also get, if you suffer, a cyber-related or a privacy-related claim. So the third-party cover is like a lot of cover that listeners would be familiar with. This is where a third party makes a claim against you that happens to fit within the description of a cyber insurance policy. That may be a privacy claim as defined, or it may be a regulatory proceeding, kind of a demand for damages or a civil proceeding that's privacy related. It'll also pick up the defense costs in defending you for that action, and also the potential liability. So it's both sort of that front end and back end cover that cyber insurance is there for you. And there can also be some different extensions depending on the policy you go with. You might be able to get cover for what's called betterment costs. So if your cybersecurity wasn't up to scratch at the time of the breach, the insurer might help you out with getting things better. But be careful, you might not have that cover. Don't assume you do. We can talk about that a bit more in a second. But also, different kinds of first party covers that are available to you. So yeah, as I said, strongly recommend the thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I love the betterment idea. Obviously, that's not included in a lot of insurance policies in the general world. Just bring you back to where you were. But the idea with cyber is you actually bounce forward, not just bounce back to where you were. Bounce forward into a better position. That's very much part of everything that to do with cyber incidents, is about making sure that you don't just recover, but you then make things better. And you learn from those mistakes. First party yourself, third party generally your clients, but could be other stakeholders as well, suppliers or technology partners or AFSLs. What happened to the second party?
Yeah, no one cares about the insurer, the second party. So it's all about first party, the insured, the the organization affected. Third parties, someone suing you, and the second party, well, they don't get a mention.
They don't get a mention.
That's the insurer in the middle.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I should mention too, one interesting thing people might not be aware of, one great benefit of getting cyber cover is you kind of become, not just an insured with, potential benefit down the road with the insurer, but the insurer actually, a lot of good insurers offer services to insureds prior to any incident, because as you can imagine, an insurer would prefer that you not have an incident. So if they can provide you with different services, different even access to cybersecurity technology, things like that, and they partner with all different organisations, So I would strongly suggest not only when you purchase insurance, don't just think about what you get if you have an incident or you get a claim against you. Think about, engaging with your insurer on some training for your staff, or it might be getting some advice around your current cyber risk position. And don't forget too, your broker is a great advocate for you in getting those services as well. And it may be the broker themselves can assist you directly, or they may be able to convince the insurer to, or get a panel law firm to come along, or maybe a panel cyber security organization to come on, do some training. Yeah, so there's a wealth of knowledge that you can tap into that has nothing to do with an incident.
Yes, exactly right. Now, you mentioned no one cares about the second party, but it's actually a good idea to have a relationship with that insurer. It's just the same way, I think, as many advice professionals have had a relationship with their PI insurers, where they're communicating and letting people know what's happening, and trying to create that relationship to say it's not just once a year upon the renewal that we talk to you, but we're giving you information, and we're having that two-way conversation. Of course, the Cyber Collective is there to help many professionals as well with a lot of that stuff, to then be able to take that forward and present
Yeah,
that to
absolutely.
the insurers and say, hey, these are all the steps we do take. How about you give us cover? And I've had the comment too around pricing from a lot of firms that say, can we get a discount because we're doing all the security? And I generally answer that question with, no, you don't get a discount, but you might actually get covered. Whereas in a lot of cases, you may not. Excellent. Now, I wanted to cover off on some of the conversation of just if we get into the nitty gritty, when we talked about first party, third party, but what does that mean to a firm, and when generally, because somebody who's not familiar with the way that these contracts are written, which is, let's face it, 99.99% of the human beings in the world, let's talk about how that could be, simplifying that into layperson's terms for people to understand at what point are they going to get covered. And I do want to talk about, the coverage point of it when it comes to the legal piece of this, which we sort of covered in a different video when we talked about the fire drill and understanding the process. But we just want to cover a little bit off on that as well as we go.
Yeah, sure. Look, it surprises me that people aren't reading insurance policies late at night for fun, like I do. So, but that's okay. They're forgiven for that. So happy to explain it. Maybe just taking a very quick step back, Fraser, when we're talking about what first party cover might be available, can I strongly suggest, to the listeners that they've got to know their policy. I'm talking generally. I'm coming up with examples of what we see commonly in the market, but they need to be specifically looking at the policy that they've purchased. And for different reasons, for different organisations, you may not have all of the covers that I'm talking about today. As you touched on, it's very price sensitive at the moment. It may be they haven't been able to demonstrate to an insurer that they've got a strong cybersecurity position at the moment. It's going to take some time. It may be they haven't got their team trained up to a level yet to give them that comfort. Those sort of things, they don't happen in 5 minutes. It's a process. I still recommend you getting cover now, but it may be that you can't get some of the, let's call them extras, until the next renewal, when you're in a better position. To know your policy and how you do that, well, you get the wording, of course, it's easy to find it. They're generally available, but make sure you have your policy schedule and you understand exactly which boxes are ticked in terms of the coverages that you're provided, both on the first party and the third party side. And also, there's this funny thing that's often attached to policies called an endorsement. You've got to be careful that your policy hasn't been subjected to possibly an amendment after a policy wording has been issued by an insurer. Because as you can imagine, the very large insurers in the market, wordings that get prepared, it's quite a process they go through to prepare a wording. So it's not easy to just suddenly change a few words here or there, or it may be for particular different organisation types, they may want to amend the way coverage works for them. And so an endorsement may be attached to your policy, which says, clause 10 is deleted and replaced with the following clause 10, that sort of thing. So just be aware of those three things. And so when I say know your policy, that's kind of what I mean. And then, yeah, look, as we've talked about already, if you've unfortunately suffered a cyber event or a cyber incident, depending on how the policy words it, you will be looking at your first party cover to be engaged or triggered using some of the lingo the insurance nerds like to use in terms of providing the coverage of your legal fees, forensic IT, other vendors that may need to be engaged for your incident. And how that coverage comes about, hopefully it's a nice smooth process of notifying the insurer, they confirm coverage, it's all pretty obvious, and away we go. It's just a matter of the vendors incurring those costs and submitting their fees to be paid by the insurer. But however, it's not I can't guarantee that it's always that simple, and if there's any coverage question marks, what would usually happen is, well, let's deal with the incident. The insurer may reserve their rights with regards to coverage of a particular thing, or they may provide the assistance that you need in the heat of it on a without prejudice basis. And some of the policies explain that that's how they do it. So, because the last thing, and the insurer, I like to think that most insurers, they're there for the insured. They have their best interests at heart, and so they don't want them. We don't want to kind of pause and wait until the coverage issues are settled. We don't have time to wait. We've got to deal with this thing. Time is not your friend with a cyber incident, and so they want you to be working with their experts to minimise the damage. And so hopefully that means that coverage isn't the priority. What the priority is dealing with the incident.
Yep. Now, the main thing when I think about with a cyber incident is the idea of somebody getting in. And there's different, getting ins. There's getting into email. There's getting into a CRM. If they're getting into a CRM and they're downloading copies of the client information and then being able to take that and use it afterwards or sell it. Talk to us about the difference, I guess, between the concept of that main, somebody getting in and attacking your business versus the concept of cyber crime and somebody then now trying to get the business to pay them some money or getting some money out of the business.
Sure. I think the first one you've described as a fairly general kind of cyber event. And so you're looking at your first party cover. It needs to be investigated. It needs to be responded to. The second scenario you mentioned, if we're talking about a ransomware attack, a lot of Australian insurers are still offering, whether it's cyber extortion cover, or they don't tend to call it ransom cover. It tends to be called cyber extortion cover, where it'll have that cover there for you to make. If you choose to make the payment to the criminal for different reasons, and we won't go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole other video. But whether you pay a ransom or not, but if you do, the cover's often there. But just keep in mind, though, there are issues that need to be worked through when it comes to ransom around whether the payment's legal and things like that, which could actually prevent the insurer from actually paying it. Again, hence why you kind of need expert advice, because you can't just assume you can just pay the ransom. An insurer doesn't want to make a payment that's in effect committing a crime to do so. So that can be a spanner in the works. And then lastly, I think you touched on where there's a fraud. So you might have a business email compromise or a social engineering fraud. Someone unfortunately has paid an invoice, or maybe a trust account transfer or something like that to the cyber criminal. And so then the policy covers that financial loss that you have suffered in the sense of making a payment that was actually not paid to the correct person. And so that payment, strictly speaking, under contract law, it still has to be paid to the third party, because that third party, they deserve their money. They provided a good or a service to you. You thought you paid for it, unfortunately you got fooled, you paid it somewhere else, and that money's gone. You're never getting that back. That that service provider, that they still deserve to be paid. And if you don't pay them, believe me, they'll come knocking. And so, the insurer is there to pick up that loss. And probably one last scenario to mention is vice versa can happen as well. You can have an incident that doesn't actually involve your system being hacked. You could be the victim of a customer or service provider being hacked themselves. And as a result, they've sent you, a fraudulent invoice or something like that. And again, you've paid it to the wrong person. Now, whilst this hasn't been decided by the courts in Australia yet, on the one hand, even though that service provider has been hacked and you could say, oh, well, it's their fault, I shouldn't have to pay again. Well, they've got an enforceable contract on one view. The courts haven't found that as a result of their lax cybersecurity, you no longer have to make that payment anymore. We're not there yet. That could come in time. At the moment, what you want to have is an insurer who steps in and says, we will provide the cover for that payment and also the costs in dealing with that whole scenario.
Yeah, it's certainly a minefield with regards to first and third party, because I think every small business we're talking about is a customer or a client of some software or some other business, and they have clients themselves. So there's that both they are a first party and a third party in many conversations or contracts. Now, if a client, for example, has that happen to them, like, because this is the same thing, right? Where the advisor is hacked and the client suffers a loss, how's that covered, or is it?
Well, I guess it depends where the loss is flowing from. So if the loss is suffered by the people that are listening to this, if they suffer the loss because they paid the money somewhere they shouldn't have, then that's there for them. But similarly, if a client has suffered a loss in paying the money elsewhere, this is where it starts to get quite complicated, because if they argue, oh, I don't want to pay that invoice again because you got hacked and it's your fault, that an email got sent to me with different bank account details and what have you. So it's your fault. So I don't have to pay you again. So so in that situation, you've suffered a loss because you haven't been paid for your services. And that's where we're starting. You're getting into that ground, that untested ground of, will my insurer pick up that loss that's a result of, my breach? Yes, I'd like to think so. But, it's a really fascinating area, and every situation needs to be closely looked at to decide who's actually suffered the financial loss and who's out of pocket, and whether there may even be another cyber insurer on the other side as well with your customer or client too. So that may complicate things as well.
Yeah, exactly. And what about for clients that end up? I've heard stories of people being hacked and sending out too good to be true offers to clients, or trying to trick clients into paying money elsewhere. Is that covered?
It's a social engineering fraud in a sense. Yes, yeah, that's very much part and parcel for what these cyber policies are about. Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic, excellent. So, talk to me about some of the terminology, because it is actually quite difficult for most people to understand this, and I guess in the scenario they really should be talking to their broker or understanding for someone like yourself to go through that policy wording and how it would respond.
Mm. Oh, look, I welcome any discussion I can have with an organisation about, what does my cyber policy actually cover. It's not as straightforward as I wish it was, and every policies do differ across the market in terms of how far they go and terminology they use. So I understand it's not easy. So yeah, absolutely, I think it's and there's some there's some fantastic brokers out there doing, really great work around helping insureds understand what cyber policies are really about, and destroying the myth that cyber doesn't pay, because in my experience it absolutely pays. Fortunately, we've seen in the media cases that actually didn't involve cyber insurance policies be described as cyber policies that didn't pay. And I think that did a lot of unhelpful harm kind of to the market and its reputation. In the in some of the more well-known cases, they were property policies, or I think one was a management liability policy. And so that's the whole point, is that cyber insurance is there to pick up, to fill in the gaps that other policies are not designed to fill. I think initially we were seeing a lot of, cyber extensions on other types of policies, but then once insurers started getting concerned with, silent cyber, as it's known, policies picking up cyber risks that it didn't, sort of take into the equation, they started being more specific about what they exclude and pushing the risk into, cyber specific design policies, which is where it belongs.
Yeah, I've noticed that too over the last few years. All of these extensions and things that were added on as bells and whistles to other policies, including from PI all the way through to management liability and D&O and all these other things that were part of, it could be part of a portfolio of insurances, and then it sort of, with those exclusions, sorry, with the endorsement, with the optional extras and the benefits and those things being removed and then being replaced by exclusions, that it really opened up that spot, or widened that gap for the need for a specific cyber liability policy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a pretty strong movement particularly out of the London insurance market, to be very clear on what cyber cover is excluded, what's in and what's out.
Yep. Now, of course, we always have this conversation around insurance that, more than any other commodity, you get what you pay for when it comes to insurance. And you already mentioned that, checking what's in your policy as well as on your schedule is really important, and understanding that. And yet, we do it all the time as human beings, right? We go back to this, great, and now I'm going to insure my car or something, and what's the cheapest policy we can find? Like this we know, it's almost like we know better, but then we have this need to find something that's cheaper.
Human nature, isn't it? And I'm sympathetic, because management organizations are facing all different costs at the moment, pressures. And we're already asking them to spend a bunch of coin on cybersecurity, and then it's like, well, just in case, we think you should buy this insurance policy. Oh, but of course you've got to buy all the other types of insurance policies too. It's not as though you buy cyber and let PI go. Of course not. You got to buy it as well. So it's not cheap. The market is probably still in a hard-ish market. If you're familiar with that terminology, it just means that at the moment, cyber insurance companies are probably, a bit more cautious about what they offer for the premium they're charging. And so, it's described as being a hard market. So you generally see, slightly higher premiums, maybe limits are a little less than what they were before, maybe not as many extensions being offered, without, maybe an organization providing, doing more homework in the purchasing process. But I do believe that the cyber insurance community is really trying hard to do better. It's trying to, simplify the underwriting process as much as possible, explain why premiums are more than what they used to be. It's not, $5 extra for a cyber policy anymore, far from it. And explaining why that is, and why, maybe a particular kind of organization is maybe suffering more than other kinds, or why even, a type of organization isn't going to get any cover offered at all by some insurers. And available on the web is, you can actually download the insurer's appetite for different kinds of organizations. So they're very transparent about if you come to us for cover, we're going to be pretty hesitant about giving you cyber insurance if you're in this space.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot in speaking to advice firms around the country and understanding that a lot of them, that market, as you mentioned, it has hardened. The price has gone up, but also the availability for financial advice firms, generally being small business, generally being such, holding such rich data and information, has certainly not been on the appetite of a lot of the insurers. And in this specific space, the market of 12, 14 different insurers is really sitting at around sort of 2 to 3, maybe 4 insurers. Is that what you're seeing?
Look, I think you're right. There's probably a handful that are managing the far majority of cover. Yeah, I think that's probably a fair estimate of the numbers. There's movement all the time, of course. It's hard to know unless you're kind of catching up with your underwriter friends, hearing what they're doing. You don't really know where they're sitting at any given time, but I think that's probably right. Yeah, I think most people know which are the kind of top 3 or 4.
Yeah, fantastic. And no doubt with being a video recording, as soon as we record it, we'll be out of date. So that's also a nice little disclaimer to throw in there. Jason, if somebody wants to catch up with you and maybe go through their policy and understand what they may be covered for, which I think is not a bad idea. You're paying that money for the policy, and it's a good idea to get sort of an opinion of somebody who knows the policy wordings and nerds out of them like I do. Then what might be the best way for somebody to find you or get hold of you or reach out to you?
Yeah, happy to take an email or a phone call. You'll find my contact details on LinkedIn. I give them away for free there, or at millsoakley.com.au. I welcome a mobile phone call or an email anytime. Happy to have a chat. Don't be scared. I'm not going to start charging you from the moment I pick up the phone. If you just want to bounce something off me, I'd welcome the opportunity to have a conversation. Because as I think I started this whole discussion, I really hope, we're moving towards cyber insurance becoming a given, and that it's not just sort of an extra that people think about.
Yep, fantastic. Jason, really appreciate your time and effort and all the information and knowledge you've brought to our community. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, mate. Thanks, Fraser.